education remains the surest bet for social and economic advancement. So today, the topic is about 529 plans, and we want to know whether or not 529 plans is a good way to save for education. But beyond that, the question is the education that we have today, the college-centric education, will that be the same one in 20 years when the people who are starting to save now for college, will it actually be college what our kids are going to go to? So this is the Beyond Return Show. It's a forum about business, markets, financial planning, and more. We're here today with Montebello Avenue's founder, Robinson Crawford. Robinson is a certified financial planner who serves clients locally and throughout the country. You're based in Phoenix, Arizona. I envy you every day more. As the weather gets colder, I have a really good story. We'll talk about weather later. My name is Gabriel Kaplan. I'm the founder of Wealth Habits and Strategic Investors. I'm a financial advisor and I help people invest and manage portfolios for them. Given my background as a CPA, I also happen to help my clients figure out strategies to optimize their taxes. So what's on the agenda for today? We are talking about 529 plans, what they are and how they can help you. We're also talking about the dangers of gamifying investments. And we're going to target specifically some brokers who have done it very successfully. We're also going to talk about the Airbnb IPO, the DoorDash IPO, and a little bit about an unknown IPO called HydroFarm. I just want to give a little brief overview of what I think are the main benefits of a 529 plan, and then we can comment on each one. Okay, so the first one is the tax deductions, and it doesn't apply to everyone, right? It depends on which state you are. The second one is tax deferred growth, great benefit, and how you achieve the tax-free withdrawals, right? So the other benefit I think we should discuss is the gift tax benefit, and the level of control someone has over that account. I think there's a specific benefit that we can talk about that. And then I guess the final thing is we should definitely talk about the primary questions that people have about 529 plans is, what if I don't need the money for college? What if my kid decides to do something else or becomes very successful in high school and doesn't want to go to college? Like I like a lot of questions whether like I open a 529 plan in New York and can my child use it for college in California, right? That's a very common question I get. Should I open a 529 plan for each child that I have? And how do 529s impact financial aid?
The tax deductions associated with 529s, the first thing to know is that they're only at the state level and they are not applicable in every state. So not every state is going to have one, and it only applies to your state income taxes. So when you hear deduction, you're probably thinking about your federal income taxes, which is for most people a pretty big bill. For most people, I like to say it's the biggest bill that you have every year by far is income tax. This is not talking about federal income tax, it's state only. And at the state level, some states allow you to put money into a 529 and take a deduction from your state income taxes for having done that up to some limit.
We're going to talk about tax deferred growth here, which is the second topic. And I think there's usually, the way I describe 529 plans is that they have two of the three benefits, right? One is, tax-free contribution, which is partial. It's only for state, as you just said. The second one is tax deferred growth. But the third one that they have, which is really good, is the tax-free withdrawals. So all in all, I would qualify them as like a 2.1, right? To have two of those benefits and very little of the contribution, right? Because the state deduction, sometimes it's very little. If you live in Texas and Florida, like you don't pay state taxes, income taxes, you don't get that benefit. But in terms of tax deferred growth, here you're just growing. It's like any IRA plan, any Roth IRA plan. You're just growing tax free. So I think that's one of the better benefits. You're enjoying that kind of growth tax free. The third one is tax free withdrawals, and this is a conditional tax free withdrawals, right? How would you explain to a client like, hey, you get these tax free withdrawals, but with a certain condition? And what is that condition?
I would frame it as qualified or non-qualified withdrawals. If you've ever worked with a 529 company or administrator, they will explain this to you. When you're making a withdrawal, and let's say it's for paying for college tuition, they'll say, hey, is this a qualified withdrawal or a non-qualified withdrawal? Qualified means used for qualifying expenses under the definitions of whatever the laws of 529s are, right? The rules of the 529 plans. A non-qualified means you're taking money out and you're not planning to use it for qualified education expenses. Therefore, you may be subject to tax on some of that growth that we just talked about deferring for the meantime.
Exactly. And so what are considered qualifying educational expenses?
This has changed pretty dramatically. So tuition has, I think, always been there.
College tuition.
College tuition. Sorry, room and board, books. They've added things like laptops that are used primarily for a full-time student. The definitions have expanded pretty significantly with the Secure Act, which I believe was 2018. Correct me if I'm wrong. The Secure Act changed and added a lot to 529s to their flexibility. You can now use a portion of them for private school in K through 12, which was totally off limits for 529 plans before 2018.
Yeah, and that's usually the general rule. I think there are certain states that haven't yet allowed that, so it becomes a really weird dynamic when your state hasn't really allowed that yet, but the federal government has. So for federal purposes, you don't have any issues, but for state, if you use it for your high school, it could create some sort of it could be non-qualified.
I want to double click on that point real quick and say that the power of 529s for those college expenses is a little bit muted if you're using them for K through 12 expenses because they just haven't had enough time to marinate. Remember, we were talking about tax-free growth. You don't have very much time of tax-free growth if you contribute to a 529 when, let's say, when your kid is born, and then 5 years later, they're in an expensive kindergarten. 5 years is just not that much time to compound, especially in today's low interest rate environment. It's a much better bet at 18 years, 20 years. So there's kind of a double whammy of difficulty with using 529s with pre-college level expenses.
The other thing I actually want to talk about, there's certain benefits by opening a 529 plan. If you're like a grandfather and you want to open up a 529 plan for your grandchild, how does it fit into the estate plan?
You ask me the hard questions, huh? Just punt that one right to me. You are able in the United States to gift anyone any amount of money. That's just a baseline legal standard that we have. If you gift a single person more than $15,000, I believe in 2020 dollars, you need to file a gift tax return for having done that. A 529 plan is a common and useful place for reducing the size of your estate if you think you're going to be subject to estate tax, and you can gift up to $15,000, of course, straight into a 29, for instance, for a minor beneficiary, to where the minor is not going to go spend this money. They don't have the power to do so. It's specific to education. It's useful. It should be invested, and you can reduce the size of your estate by $15,000 per year without filing a gift tax return.
Technically speaking, like when you open a 529 plan, right, you are the owner of the account, right? And then the beneficiary of that account is, let's say, your grandson. But if you pass away, is that money in the account included in your estate?
I believe the answer to that is no. It's technically out of estate, even if you're the owner of that 529 plan.
It's tricky, right? Like you still control the money, so you could still get it back. You would pay a penalty if you don't use it for your education of your whoever is intended for, but it's still under your control, but it's outside of your estate. From a practical point of view, if your kid or your grandchild is applying for financial aid, how does it really matter, or how does it matter who owns the account, if it's the grandfather or father?
Correct me if I'm wrong here. I believe the answer to this is that 529s are fairly, compared to other funding vehicles, fairly well positioned in the financial aid picture, assuming that a parent or a guardian or a grandparent owns the owns the account and you're applying for financial aid, that this won't be as highly penalized as, for instance, gifting an account of equivalent value to the student who's applying. That would be a worse situation for financial aid.
So it is true that assets that remain under the parent or the grandparent is worth less than assets held by the student. I will say though that if you gift that money to the child in, let's say, year one of school, right, to pay for year one of school, when he's reporting income in year two, he has to list what he was gifted on the year before, and that becomes technically like income for the student. So it's 100%. So usually, I think the tactic is always use the 529 plans from the parents first because they're not considered like that. And then the last year, you use everything from the grandparents because it doesn't matter what the income for year five if you're not in school in year five.
I want to zoom out slightly from that. I totally second what you say. A 529 plan is an interesting specific thing to manage because a 529 plan will always have an owner and then a beneficiary.
Correct.
And these are two separate things and two separate people. So you've always got to be thinking about, like Gabe was just talking about, who's the owner? How does this apply to FAFSA if student aid is part of your strategy? Obviously, giving a young person a 529 plan where they are the owner is a very different thing than you as the parent, for instance, staying the owner and listing your child as the beneficiary. The owner is the one who really functionally has control over the account.
And that leads me to a very important point that gets missed a lot, and it's a big question that many people have. Like, so can you have a 520? Can you open a 529 plan for an unborn child?
Yes.
I like that. That the sureness of your answer there.
Yes. I'm going with a yes.
So, but the question is, okay, so let's say you open it. You're the owner. Who do you list out as the beneficiary?
Since there must be a beneficiary and an owner on every 529 account, you've probably got to use someone else in your family. You could use another child, you could use yourself, you could use your wife.
What happens if it's the first child you're going to have, right? Would you list yourself as the beneficiary and the owner until your child is born, and then you just change the beneficiary, or would you use who would you use if you have nephews?
That's a
It's a
good
trick
question.
question. It's a trick question. I'm warning you here.
I'm going with yourself, but I'm curious to see your answer.
So technically speaking, if it's yourself and then you change the beneficiary, that change, the cumulative amount of money that happens when you change the beneficiary becomes a gift in that year. So if you have more than $15,000, you're gonna have to file a form. If you have more than $30,000, if you contribute, then you have to probably put it as it's within that lifetime exemption that you have, right? So lifetime exemption is a set amount of money you can give to your heirs without incurring estate taxes, and that gets used up. Most people end up using it when they pass away, but they don't use up all of it because it's a lot of money. But the trick here is to use someone of the same generation. If you have someone in your family of the same generation, you're allowed to switch between beneficiaries of the same generation. So if you have nephews of the age plus or minus 10 years of the age of your future child, then list one of those nephews, and you can play around and say to your siblings, hey, look, I don't have children yet. If I pass away, I just want to give this gift to my nephew because I really care about him. But if I end up having children, it's going to revert back to my child first. Just wanted to let you know, but I really care about the nephew. But technically speaking, it's a tax benefit that you don't want to miss out on. But they don't need to know that.
Got it. You covered a couple of them. One of them was we talked about impact on financial aid, different states, and where, like, what kind of education this can pay for, and should I open multiple 529s for my multiple children?
You can open one for one child and then move that to a second child or split it up. That's very easy. You can just talk to whoever is the account officer on the other side, and they can help you out with that. I've I don't have a second child yet, so I haven't done it. The one thing I wanted to mention is a lot of people ask me like, oh, I live in California. There's no benefit for um, putting money into the California 529 because I don't get state tax deduction in California. So where do I open my 529 plan? Can I open it somewhere else?
If you do not have a restriction on which 529 plan you have to use in order to harvest a state income tax benefit, my personal favorite, non-financial advice, is my529.org, which is, I believe, a Utah-based plan.
That's my favorite too. Yeah.
Really good tech, really good customer support, super low-cost investment options.
Last topic that I want to talk about, which is where do I put the investments? Like someone opens the account and then the first question I get is, okay, where do I put the money in? And that's a very good option. I think also, um, it depends if you're more active in this sense and you can go in and rebalance stuff, then you might want to consider just investing in, a couple of equity indexes until the kid reaches a certain age that's close to going to college, where you would shift to fixed income.
Yeah, that's a good question, and a more nuanced one than it would seem from the limited menu of investment options. It also matters if you're planning to add more to this plan or if you're going to do that accelerated gift that we just talked about, right? You might have a different risk tolerance if you are dollar cost averaging and adding, $10,000 a year over the next 10 years compared to investing a lump sum. That investment plan might look different for you, but it's all about timeline, all about risk tolerance, and the range of outcomes that you can have with investing.
And that leads us to the usual disclosure that we have that this is not investment advice, and then you should always talk to your, financial planner or advisor, whoever is, advising you on these topics, and that this is merely entertainment and education. The next topic we should discuss is the dangers of gamifying investments, and I think this is something you wanted to add. And
as you're well aware, Gabe, November was an unbelievable month for investments and for many investors. It seemed like everything went up, and it seemed like everything went up by a lot. I'm getting more messages from friends, people coming out of the woodwork who have had a lot of short-term investment success. There is one application on your phone in particular that makes it very easy to open an account, start to trade, and in fact, start to use more exotic and difficult investment options. I'm talking, of course, about Robinhood, the app. I just want to talk broadly thematically about kind of gamifying investments and how certain approaches can make it seem like it's maybe a casino or some sort of fun Candy Crush like game on your phone, right? I've heard from a lot of people that they do feel like that they check the daily performance of their investments many times a day on their phone, or notifications are very powerful, right? They get in our headspace very quickly, and broadly, I just don't like it. I'm just going to grumble and be a grumpy old man. I don't think that that's good or healthy. I don't think that's going to teach you good investing habits. I don't think it's a track for success for most investors. So I'm not about it.
We don't have disagreements here. I will say that companies don't change, within 5 minutes. Like, it's not that the world changed for a company. Exxon didn't like open up like 15,000 wells in like 5 minutes. That doesn't happen. So like, you shouldn't be trading on information that didn't even exist, or move. Like, things don't happen so quickly. So investment should be long term, should be thoughtful. And yes, the counter argument to that is only like, yeah, but markets move, right? If the market moves, 20% in a couple of days downwards, maybe it's a good opportunity to buy.
Here's my counter argument, Gabe. But dude, my buddy was on Robinhood and he made like 20 grand last month. So how about that?
It puts pressure on whoever is listening to that argument, or that statement.
I recommend you are more thoughtful. I recommend not using the apps that give you so many notifications about what's happening. Sometimes quietness with respect to what's going on with your investments is actually a good place to be. And I would tell you that the most successful investors are not getting dinged on their phone from Robinhood 12 times a day.
On the third topic here, Airbnb IPO, DoorDash IPO, and HydroFarm IPO. So nice leadway here. Like what we talk about, don't invest for the short term, and then we have the crazy mania of these IPOs. There was a very interesting video interview of Brian Chesky while his stock was, had IPO'd. When they informed him that the stock had gone up to, I think it was like $100, or that his Airbnb was worth 100 billion, and he had no answer. Did you see that?
I did. He was flabbergasted. I want to say what did they price in the 60 or 70 range, and then they were trading at well over $100. And
Yeah.
the anchor asked him for his feedback, and he admitted first that he hadn't seen that price, and then he kind of stammered through, "Oh my gosh, he ended on something like, we're very lucky or very blessed," or
Yeah.
so some
Yeah.
non-answer.
Yeah. God, that was an interesting moment.
It was. What do you make of all this? This is 3 hot IPOs, right?
Airbnb, I have not looked at it enough, I will say. DoorDash, uh, it is overpriced in my opinion. At some point, it's going to come down. The market is so much more competitive, and I don't think they were able to inch out a profit margin what people are expecting in 10 years. I just don't think it's there. I think that you look at Domino's. Have you seen like the Domino's app? It's like choose which one you want to be delivered by, like Uber Eats, or I don't know what the other two ones were. This market is uber competitive.
It
It's
is.
going to be, it is so competitive. Margins will go down. Like people don't care who delivers it as long as it's the delivery is the cheapest. What's going to drive profitability at DoorDash is going to be simple logistics, and it reminds me of the distribution companies of alcohol beverages, where the profitability is in the route density. So they will have a route that they do, and their algorithms will optimize for those routes. But the more concentration of delivers they have in a very specific area, the more profitable they are. However, their initial focus has always been on the suburbs. The suburbs have no route density, and it just doesn't make sense. Like that is the driver of profitability, which is route density for any sort of packages in the future.
I want to bring up a point there, which is I'll call broadly expectations investing, right? In every
Yeah,
stock price of every stock on the market, there's a set of embedded expectations of what investors or shareholders are forecasting about a company's future. And when you hear a pundit or you hear us say the stock is expensive, we mean that the embedded expectations for that company are are high, or in certain cases, with certain things in today's market, extremely high. These
yeah,
companies are expected to perform at an incredibly high level, grow revenue, achieve profitability, perform at just really, really high levels. So a very excited, exuberant market like we have today means that investors are expecting really, really big things execution wise out of these companies.
the SaaS stocks and the tech stocks, they feel very bubbly right now, and that's I don't know where we go in 2021. The expectations of so many SaaS stocks, subscription as a service stocks, mainly the focus on enterprise, are valued so highly. It's very scary to be invested in them, knowing that they're great companies, they have great prospects, but the market is ahead of itself. The final one I'm going to talk about is HydroFarm, which is kind of like the unknown IPO of this week, and they focus on urban farming and any sort of indoor farming equipment. They're a supplier in that market. It's a very, very fragmented market, and they're one of the leaders. I think, I mean, if I think about it, this is like not a tech stock, but it's in a very growth oriented environment. Urban farming, it's the new thing in urban centers. Gotham Farms, there's a couple of other ones that have come out, and have started to farm lettuce and other sort of products inside the city. And the benefit of buying those is that it's more fresh. There is certain economic validation to buying those premium products. And so that needs an infrastructure, and that these guys, HydroFarm, are there to supply the infrastructure. The other thing that's very interesting is that when you think about indoor farming or supplies, lights, all that stuff, you also think about weed, right? And so there has to be a supplier for that kind of operation. If you think about weed, and the growing of weed and the distribution of this, there's more like four businesses, right? And it's the supplies that you need to grow it, the real estate where you're going to grow it, the growing, the exercise of growing it, and then the distribution of it, right? And so these guys focus on one of them. And I think if you look at the value chain of weed, you will see that some elements of that value chain will be more profitable than others. The supplies towards the growing of weed will be one of the more profitable segments of weed growing.
Do you eat food from indoor grown, urban farmed food?
I buy Gotham Farms lettuce. I just feel like it lasts longer. The premium, it's I think 50 cents for the same kind of packaging that you get elsewhere. It just feels like it lasts like 3 days, and so sometimes it gives me the flexibility. I buy at least one of them. I usually buy like 4 of those packages like a week, because we do eat a lot of salad at home. 1 or 2 of them are always Gotham Farms. Speaking of weather, the one thing I wanted to mention about your weather is like the other day I woke up here in my house. It was a very cold day and I was freezing, literally freezing. I think the outside temperature was like 37 Fahrenheit. My house, which is set for 70 at night, so my wife sleeps well. It was probably like in the high 50s. So she wakes me up and says like, "It's freezing. It's literally freezing." And the first thing that I think about when it's freezing is like, "Oh my God, maybe what happened to my child's room? Like, is it freezing too?" So I go into his room, I touch his ears and his hands, and they are literally freezing. They're pretty cold. So I go down to the basement where the oil tank is sitting, and it's empty, and the machine is not working. And so I immediately like call up the oil person, the oil contractor, whatever, the one who supplies the oil, says, "Hey, look, I think this stopped working. I don't know what's going on here." And they're like, "Yeah, we see your meter. They have a direct feed to my meter." It says, "But we're going to come tomorrow." But look, it says error in the boiler. This is not good. She's like, "Turn it off on." So I turn it off on, whatever, and it still didn't work. And she's like, "Okay, well, we'll send someone there." It's like in 45 minutes I had oil. But apparently the tank of oil at the bottom, there might be still some like remnants of gunk in there that makes the measurement that they get a little bit faulty. Like it shows that there's oil, but what there isn't. It's not an effective read. And so lesson learned about home ownership. Make sure you always have oil. Literally freeze to death.
Oh my gosh.
Very cold.
My brother would call you a Joe homeowner in this scenario.
Why? Because I'm such a beginner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you let it get to zero. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for being on the show.